"Sir, I can make your mother walk again." That's what the barefoot boy said in the rain, and in 5 minutes he revealed more about Charles's mother than any doctor had in 11 years. The rain didn't come down hard. It just hung in the air, like Savannah couldn't make up its mind. The grocery store parking lot shimmered with puddles, oil slicks dancing on the surface like tiny kaleidoscopes. Cars rolled in and out, windshield wipers dragging across glass in slow rhythm. People moved with purpose. No one noticed the boy standing by the cart return. Tyrese Mallory stood barefoot on the concrete. Not moving, not begging, just watching. He was small for 11, skin smudged with dirt, hair too long for someone who didn't have a place to sleep. But his posture didn't slouch. His eyes didn't wander. He was waiting. That much was clear. At 3:17 p.m., the black Lincoln Navigator pulled into the front row. Charles Radnor stepped out in polished shoes, a charcoal gray suit that hadn't caught a wrinkle, and the kind of watch you don't wear to check the time. You wear it so others can't. He moved fast. Always had. The bag boy barely had time to hand off the groceries before Charles tapped his key fob and spun around toward the driver's seat. Then Tyrese spoke. "Sir, I can make your mother walk again." Charles stopped mid-step. His face didn't change immediately. Just a pause, a flicker of confusion. Then, slowly, he turned. Standing just 10 feet away, Tyrese met his eyes without blinking. "What did you just say?" Charles asked, his voice sharp and clipped. Tyrese didn't flinch. "Your mother. I can help her walk again." A flash of irritation crossed Charles's face, the kind that comes from someone used to being left alone and not used to being spoken to by barefoot kids. "That's not funny. It's not a joke. How do you even know who I am?" Tyrese shrugged. "I know your name. I know she had her stroke 11 years ago. I know she can't lift her left arm past her waist. I know she cries at night when you're not home." That landed like a punch. Charles's jaw tightened. His eyes scanned the area. A few shoppers were lingering near their cars. One woman pausing mid-door open, caught in the oddness of the scene. "Who put you up to this?" Charles snapped. "Is this some kind of scam?" "I'm not asking for anything," Tyrese said, matter of fact. "I just need to see her. 5 minutes. That's all." Charles stared at the boy. Hard. He wasn't sure if he was angry, scared, or just thrown off. This kid knew things he shouldn't. Personal things. Painful things. "I don't know who you are," Charles said slowly. "But if this is some sort of act, you picked the wrong man." Tyrese didn't back down. "If I'm lying, you'll know in 5 minutes." Silence stretched between them, thick as the clouds above. Finally, Charles let out a breath. "You got a name?" "Tyrese." Charles looked him up and down, then muttered, "Get in the car." He unlocked the back door, and Tyrese climbed in, careful not to dirty the seats, even though they already cost more than most apartments. Charles sat in the front. He didn't say a word as they pulled out of the parking lot. Traffic was light. Tyrese looked out the window, not fidgeting, not speaking unless spoken to. Charles glanced at him in the mirror more than once. Something about the way the boy sat there, so calm, it didn't make sense. They passed rows of mossy oaks and worn-down brick buildings. As they crossed into Isle of Hope, the homes grew larger, the gates taller. Soon, they reached the Radnor estate. An iron gate slid open with a buzz. They rolled up the circular driveway and stopped under the porte-cochere. "You have exactly 5 minutes," Charles said, turning to face him. "You go near my mother, and I don't like what I see. I will have you removed. Understand?" Tyrese nodded once. "You'll want to hear what I say." Charles didn't answer. He hit the lock button, opened his door, and motioned for Tyrese to follow. But what neither of them realized yet was that 5 minutes would change the rest of their lives. Charles led Tyrese through the side entrance, not the main one guests used. The path was lined with hedges trimmed to perfection and a silence that felt enforced, the kind of silence money buys. A housekeeper, Dolores, a woman in her late 50s with tired eyes, watched them come in. She opened her mouth to speak, but Charles shot her a look that silenced her. "She's in the sunroom," he said to Tyrese, his voice low. "Like always." Tyrese didn't hesitate. He stepped through the hall like he knew the layout, like he'd been there before. That detail didn't slip past Charles. The sunroom smelled faintly of lavender and hand cream. Helen Radner sat in a high-backed chair near the windows. A blanket draped over her lap, her wheelchair pushed off to the side. Her silver hair was neatly combed. She turned her head when she heard footsteps, her eyes sharp despite everything else that had withered over the years. She smiled when she saw her son. "Back already?" Charles motioned to Tyrese. "He asked to see you." Helen looked past him, studying the boy. Her smile faded into confusion. "Who's this?" Tyrese stepped forward slowly, hands at his sides. "Hi, Miss Helen." Her brows drew together. "Do I know you?" "No, ma'am, not yet." Charles folded his arms and leaned against the doorframe, watching every movement. Tyrese pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. He laid it gently on the table beside her. "You made this in 1982. Pen and ink sketch of the oak tree in your backyard when you lived on Ogeechee Road." Helen's mouth fell slightly open. Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper. "I haven't seen this in 40 years, she whispered. Charles straightened. "How the hell do you have that?" Tyrese didn't look at him. "It was in her attic, with the others. But she stopped drawing after the stroke. I thought maybe this would remind her what her hands used to know." Helen's eyes were glassy now. Her fingers brushed the edges of the paper like it might dissolve. "You're from the neighborhood?" she asked. "No, ma'am. I don't have a home, but I know where yours was." Charles stepped forward. "Enough games. Tell me how you know all this. Tell me who sent you." "No one sent me." "Then how?" Tyrese turned to face him. "I had a dream about her 3 nights ago. She was sitting alone, couldn't move. But she kept whispering a name. Yours." "That's nonsense," Charles snapped. "Maybe," Tyrese said. "But here I am." Helen let out a weak laugh. Half disbelief, half awe. "What else did you see?" "You," Tyrese said softly. "Standing outside her room, angry, blaming yourself, but you don't know why. Or maybe you do." The room got still. Charles's face changed. Just for a second. The kind of change that happens when a person's armor slips and something raw gets through. Tyrese kept going. "You remember the night of the stroke? You came home late. She had asked you to visit. Said it might be her last birthday." "Stop," Charles said. "She waited up for you. You never came." "I said stop." Helen's hand touched her son's arm. "Charles," his eyes burned. "This kid's playing some trick. I don't know how he knows these things, but I didn't come here for this." "Then why did you bring me?" Tyrese asked. Charles looked at him, looked hard, but he had no answer. Helen's voice was thin. "I remember that night." Silence again. "I heard something in my chest before it happened. Like a door closing," she said. "And I thought, if I could just hold on long enough, he'd come." Tyrese moved closer, kneeling beside her. "You did. You made it through, but your heart never forgave the rest of you." Helen reached out her hand, touching his cheek. Something in her eyes shifted. Recognition, or maybe memory. "Who are you, really?" she asked. Tyrese smiled. "That doesn't matter yet. What matters is whether you believe you can heal." Charles turned and walked out without a word, the door clicking behind him. But Helen's hand began to twitch, ever so slightly, and neither she nor Tyrese pretended not to notice. Charles didn't go far. He stood in the hallway just outside the sunroom, back to the wall, hands clenched at his sides. His thoughts moved faster than he could keep up. He didn't like being blindsided. And whatever this kid was doing, it had cracked something open he had kept sealed for over a decade. He could hear them talking softly behind the door. It grated on him. Dolores approached from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. "Mr. Radner, everything all right?" He didn't answer right away. "She's talking, like she used to," he said, unsure if it was an accusation or a confession. Dolores raised an eyebrow. "Then maybe don't stop whatever's happening in there." Charles didn't respond. She walked away. Back in the sunroom, Helen's hands now rested in her lap, her right one still, her left trembling just slightly, as if it remembered something it hadn't done in years. Tyrese sat on the floor in front of her, cross-legged. You always kept your drawings, he said quietly, even when you stopped making new ones. Helen gave a soft smile. They felt like proof that I used to be more than what this body became. You still are, Tyrese replied, but you stopped believing it. She looked at him with a tired kind of wisdom. You talk like someone older. Maybe I am, he said with a grin. She chuckled. Actually chuckled. It had been a while since that sound lived in this house. Tyrese leaned in. Can I touch your hand? Helen nodded, unsure why she was saying yes to a stranger. Tyrese took her hand gently, placing it in both of his. His palms were warm. Not unusually so, but warm in a way that felt rooted, grounded, like he carried something steady inside him, something too big for his body. Close your eyes, he said. She did. Now think of that tree you used to sketch. The one in the backyard on Ogeechee Road. Not just how it looked, how it felt. The way the bark scraped your fingers when you leaned against it. The way the wind moved through its branches in early fall. Can you see it? I can, she whispered. Now think of your feet on the ground underneath it. Helen's breath hitched. Tyrese's voice stayed calm, steady. What did it feel like to stand there? A tear slipped down her cheek. Free, she said. Say it again. Free! Charles had cracked the door open a few inches and watched through the gap. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the air in the room had changed. Helen was crying now, not from sadness, but something deeper. Maybe it was grief. Maybe it was memory. Whatever it was, it looked real. Tyrese gently placed her hand back on her lap. Miss Helen, he said softly, you don't have to stay in that chair. Not forever. But first you need to remember what it felt like to be alive. Not just breathing. Alive. She opened her eyes and looked down at her hands. Her left hand twitched again. A small but undeniable movement. Her eyes widened. I felt that. I know, Tyrese said. She looked up at him, almost afraid to ask. How? I just reminded you of what you already had, he said. It was never gone, just buried. Charles pushed the door open, stepping in. His voice was low, more cautious now. What do you want from us? Tyrese looked up. Nothing. Money? No. Fame? Tyrese smiled sadly. Nobody wants to listen to a barefoot kid who sleeps under porches. Charles studied him. Then, why help her? Because you forgot who she was. And she forgot too. Somebody had to remember. Helen's fingers twitched again, but something else had started shifting now. Not just in Helen, but in Charles, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. Charles didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark of his study with the desk lamp off, the faint glow of a bourbon bottle near his knee untouched. The boy's words had lodged somewhere in his chest, and his mother's hand. That twitch. That shouldn't have been possible. He'd paid good money for answers. Top neurologists in Miami, Boston, Dallas. All of them said the same thing. Permanent damage. No recovery expected. His mother's body had given up long ago. So how the hell had a kid with no shoes stirred something in her that thousands of dollars in clinical therapy couldn't? Charles leaned back in the leather chair, staring at the ceiling, and time started to slip. He remembered the night of her stroke clearly. He had been in Tampa for a startup pitch. It was his mother's birthday. She'd called him the day before, her voice light and hopeful. Come home if you can, darling, she had said. We'll make peach cobbler, like we used to. He had told her he'd try. But in truth, he didn't plan to. Deals don't wait. That night, around midnight, his phone buzzed. It was Dolores, panicked, crying. Helen had collapsed in the hallway. By the time Charles arrived the next morning, her speech was slurred, her eyes sunken, and half her body limp. He never said it out loud, but he carried the guilt like a secret chain wrapped around his ribs. He knew she waited for him. He knew the cobbler never got made. He told himself he did everything after that, paid for the best care, remodeled the house for accessibility, visited when he could. But none of it felt like enough. It never had. He took a sip of bourbon and stared at the photo on his bookshelf, him and his mother from years ago, before the stroke. She was laughing, arms around his waist. Her hands worked back then. She used to draw landscapes, paint with oils. He walked upstairs and peeked into her room. It was quiet. She was asleep, but her left hand rested outside the blanket, twitching lightly. Her brow was furrowed like she was dreaming something deep. The next morning, Charles found Tyrese on the back porch. He was sitting on the steps, talking to one of the house cats like it was his friend. "You slept here?" Charles asked. Tyrese nodded. "Didn't want to leave yet." Charles stepped outside. The morning was humid. Birds called out from the trees, but it all felt heavy. "You want to tell me how you know all this about my mother?" Tyrese scratched his elbow. "I already did. Dreams don't explain the sketch you gave her." "Sometimes dreams don't come from sleep." Charles sat down on the opposite end of the step. "Are you trying to be cryptic on purpose, or are you always like this?" Tyrese gave a small grin. "I say things the way I hear them." They sat in silence for a while. Then Charles asked something he hadn't planned to. "What about me? Did you dream about me too?" Tyrese's smile faded. He looked at him, not like a child looks at a grown man, but like someone searching a face for what still hurts. "Yeah," he said softly. "I saw you standing in a room full of light, but you couldn't feel any of it, like it was shining for everyone but you." Charles didn't know what to say. "You know what pain looks like in other people," Tyrese continued, "but you won't look at your own." Charles cleared his throat. "You ever think about becoming a therapist?" Tyrese chuckled. "I don't think I'd pass the dress code." Charles looked down. "You ever know your own mother?" Tyrese was quiet for a moment. "Not really. I remember the sound of her voice, but not her face. People always looked past me when I was little. I got good at watching." They sat together, the air thick with something that wasn't quite peace, but wasn't war either. But Charles didn't know yet. Tyrese hadn't just come to help Helen. He had come for something buried in Charles too. Helen sat upright in her bed that afternoon, something she hadn't done without assistance in years. The nurse had already clocked it, said her pulse was stronger, her breathing more even. Dolores kept glancing at her like she wasn't sure if she was seeing things. Charles stood nearby, arms crossed, watching everything. Tyrese was in the room again, standing near the window with the curtains half pulled, sunlight painting soft shapes on the floor. "What did you do to her?" Charles finally asked. Tyrese turned. "Nothing. She remembered something." "That's not a medical answer. She's not just a medical case." Dolores gave Charles a look over her shoulder. "Whatever it is, it's working." Charles shook his head. "Working doesn't mean real. The brain can play tricks. There's something else going on here. Something off." Tyrese stepped forward. "If you're scared, just say it." Charles's jaw tensed. "I don't get scared." "Then what are you doing here instead of in your office downtown?" That cut a little deeper than it should have. Helen raised her hand. "Boys, please." They both went quiet. Charles moved closer to her bedside. "You sure you're okay?" "I'm more than okay," she said softly. "I feel like I've woken up from a long sleep. He's doing something for me. Something I didn't think was possible anymore." Charles sighed. "What exactly?" Tyrese stepped forward again. "I want to try something, but she has to trust me." Helen looked at him and nodded. "I do." He moved to the foot of the bed. "I want you to close your eyes, Miss Helen. And I want you to picture yourself standing at the kitchen sink in your old house. You remember that?" She smiled faintly. "Of course I do. Picture the sunlight coming through the window. The pattern it made on the floor. You used to stand barefoot on that tile." "Yes." "Feel it in your feet. Let that memory go all the way down into your legs." Charles started to say something, but Dolores hushed him with a look. Tyrese's voice stayed calm and low. "Now think about turning around to pick up the dish towel. You had a yellow one with flowers. You kept it on the oven handle." Helen's breathing slowed. "Now imagine yourself stepping to the left. Just 1 foot. Slowly. Can you see it?" "I can," she whispered. "Now move that same foot, just a little." Her brow furrowed. Her leg twitched beneath the blanket. Charles stepped forward. "Wait!" Dolores grabbed his arm. "Don't interrupt." Tyrese kept going. "Now move the other one. Let it follow." Her right knee shifted, just slightly. Tears welled in her eyes. I felt that. I know. Tyrese said gently. You're remembering how to connect to yourself. Charles stared, his throat tight. This isn't possible. Tyrese finally looked at him. Why? Because it didn't come from a lab coat? Charles didn't answer. Helen's voice was shaking but strong. He's not healing me like doctors tried to. He's helping me find the parts of me that still work. That never stopped working, Dolores whispered. Have mercy. Tyrese stepped back, letting her rest. Her head sank back into the pillow, but she was smiling. Charles watched it all, unsure whether to be amazed or afraid. This wasn't how the world worked. At least not his world. He followed Tyrese into the hallway once the room quieted. Tell me why you're really here, Charles said. Not the dreams, not the riddles. Why her? Why now? Tyrese looked up at him, eyes calm. Because someone has to believe in her before she can believe in herself. That's all healing ever really is. Charles scoffed. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters. But something had cracked in Charles's foundation, and he didn't know yet how quickly it would start to crumble. By that evening, the house felt different. Not louder, just more alive. Helen had eaten dinner sitting upright, her spoon steadier than it had been in years. She even asked for the news on the TV, then turned it off halfway through, saying it was too depressing. That was new. But Charles wasn't celebrating. He paced the patio outside the living room, phone pressed to his ear. Franklin, I need you to look into something, he said, voice low. A kid named Tyrese Mallory, African American, about 11 or 12, might not be in school. No records I can find, no address. Franklin, his private investigator, sighed on the other end. You calling me for ghost stories now? Just find out who he is, Charles snapped. I don't care how long it takes. Inside, Helen watched the boy draw with one of her old sketch pencils. She had boxes of them stored away, touched only once in the last decade. Now she watched as Tyrese shaded in the lines of a simple tree. It looked eerily like the one from her old house. You draw like someone who's done this before, she said softly. I've never drawn with a pencil, Tyrese replied, still focused. Only in my head. She studied him, that quiet intensity. Where are you from, Tyrese? I don't think I'm from anywhere. She tilted her head. Everyone's from somewhere. Not me. I just show up when I need to. Something about the way he said it made the air in the room tighten. Charles walked back in. All right, that's enough. Time to go. Tyrese looked up. Why? Because I don't know who you are, and I don't like strangers playing Messiah in my house. Helen opened her mouth to protest, but Tyrese stood on his own. I understand, he said. I was just trying to help. Charles stepped closer. Then help by telling me the truth. Where do you sleep at night? Who feeds you? How do you know the things you know? Tyrese didn't flinch. I listen. I feel things. Don't give me that mystic nonsense, Charles barked. You show up, tell my mother she can walk again, and now she's twitching like she's waking up from a coma? What's the game here? No game, Tyrese said. But you're looking for one because it makes you feel in control. Helen tried again. Charles, please. He turned to her. You don't know him, Mom. You don't know what he wants. You're just grateful. Someone paid attention. Tyrese spoke, voice calm. She's grateful. Someone saw her. Charles glared at him. Don't twist my words. I'm not. But you need someone to blame. So blame me. The boy walked toward the front door, shoes still nowhere in sight. Charles didn't stop him. He couldn't. His hands were shaking. Helen's voice rose behind him. You're afraid of what he might be proving, Charles. He turned, pain creeping into his features. I'm afraid of giving you false hope. That's all. She shook her head. No. You're afraid of not being the one who saved me. That hit harder than anything Tyrese had said. Charles watched the boy walk down the driveway. Small shoulders squared against the dark. Dolores appeared in the doorway, drying her hands. You really letting that boy walk out alone at this hour? He's not my responsibility, Charles muttered. Dolores frowned. You know, for a man with everything, You sure don't know when something real is standing in front of you. Charles didn't answer. Back in her room, Helen reached for the sketchpad Tyrese left behind. She flipped through the pages. One sketch stopped her cold. It was of her, standing, not just standing, smiling. One hand holding a peach cobbler. Her hair loose, sunlight falling across her shoulders. She didn't remember describing that moment to him. She didn't remember saying anything about the cobbler. But the picture was real. Too real. And it left her wondering what else she hadn't remembered yet. Helen didn't sleep much that night. The image Tyrese had drawn, her holding the cobbler in that yellow kitchen standing tall, kept flashing through her mind. The cobbler was so vivid, she could almost smell the nutmeg. That moment wasn't just imagined, it had happened. But she hadn't thought of it in years, maybe decades. By morning, she'd made a decision. She pressed the call button next to her bed. Dolores appeared moments later, brushing sleep from her eyes. I want to try standing today, Helen said. Dolores blinked. What? I want to try. Just a few seconds. Help me to the window. I need the light. Dolores hesitated. You sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in the last 11 years. Word got around the house quick. By the time Helen was halfway upright with Dolores on one side and the nurse on the other, Charles had made his way into the room, confused, guarded, but curious. You're pushing too hard, he said. You don't need to do this. I do need to, Helen said, her voice firmer than it had been in years. She took a shaky breath. The nurse counted down. On 3. 1, 2, 3. Helen's feet touched the floor. Her weight shifted slightly forward. Her knees locked. Arms out to stabilize. She stood. Not fully. Not strong. But for 3 full seconds, she was vertical. Her own weight under her own legs. Then she crumpled into the chair behind her, breathing heavy but laughing. Laughing like a woman who had just remembered she wasn't dead yet. Charles stood frozen. Dolores clapped a hand over her mouth. The nurse's eyes welled with tears. Helen looked at her son. Did you see? He nodded once. Slowly. Yeah, I saw. Then don't ever tell me that boy was just a fluke, she said. He didn't respond. He couldn't. Later that afternoon, Charles drove around Savannah for hours, not sure where he was going. He found himself in neighborhoods he hadn't set foot in since college, the rundown parts, the forgotten corners. At a bus stop off Skidaway Road, he spotted him. Tyrese was sitting on a bench, eating a bag of plain chips like it was a feast. Charles pulled up and rolled the window down. You're still here. Tyrese looked over. Didn't know where else to go. Charles got out of the car, walked over, and sat next to him. She stood, he said. Tyrese didn't smile, just nodded. 3 seconds, Charles added. That's a beginning. They sat in silence for a while. I had a dream last night, Charles said. I was 9. She was baking that cobbler. I was standing behind her trying to steal a peach slice. She slapped my hand and laughed. I hadn't thought of that day in years. Tyrese looked at him. She remembered it too. That's why I drew it. Charles turned to him. Why me, Tyrese? Out of everyone? Why my mother? The boy tilted his head slightly, like the answer was obvious. Because you forgot how to care. And your mother forgot how to feel seen. That's a dangerous mix. Charles swallowed hard. You talk like someone who's been through it. I've seen a lot, Tyrese replied. People think broken means gone, but broken just means something happened. If you find the right pieces, you can still build something new. Charles studied him again. Still no shoes, no phone, no backpack, and yet this boy carried himself like someone twice his age. I don't understand how you know all this, he said. It doesn't make sense. Not everything good has to, Tyrese answered. Charles looked out at the traffic passing by. What happens now? You take her outside tomorrow, Tyrese said. You let her feel the wind on her face. You let her remember the world isn't just walls and windows. Let her move, even if it's just a step. Charles nodded slowly. And you? He asked. Where will you go? Tyrese shrugged. Where I'm needed. But Charles wasn't ready to let him walk away. Not yet. Because deep down, He knew Tyrese wasn't just helping his mother heal. He was helping him remember how to feel again. The next morning, Charles did something he hadn't done in years. He wheeled his mother out to the back garden. No nurses, no staff. Just the two of them. The garden had once been Helen's favorite place. Before the stroke, she'd kept it blooming, roses along the side, jasmine creeping up the brick walls, a little iron bench under the camellia tree where she used to read. Now, it had gone quiet, overgrown in places, dry in others, but the bench was still there. He parked her near it. The sun was warm. A few bees floated lazily from flower to flower. "I forgot how good this feels," Helen said, tilting her face up. Charles sat beside her on the low wall. "You used to come out here every morning, even in the cold." She nodded. "It's where I did my thinking, where I prayed." He hesitated, then asked, "Did you really believe God would help you walk again?" Helen didn't answer right away. "I stopped asking for that a long time ago. I started asking for peace instead." He looked down. "And now? Now, I think maybe they weren't the same thing." They sat quietly for a while. "He reminds me of someone," she added. Charles turned to her. "Tyrese?" She nodded. "Your father?" Charles blinked. "What?" "Not in looks, in presence. There's something in that boy that lingers, like your father used to, before everything changed." Charles stared out at the flowers. "You never really told me much about him after he left," he said. "He didn't leave," she replied. "He disappeared. One day he just didn't come home. No call, no body. Just gone." Charles stiffened. "I thought he died in a car accident." She shook her head. "That's what I told people. It was easier than the truth." He frowned. "You mean he vanished?" "I spent years trying to find out what happened. Cops thought he just walked away. Some said maybe he was running from something. I never believed that." Charles couldn't process it all at once. "What are you saying?" Helen reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out something small and folded, worn at the edges. A photo. She handed it to Charles. It was an old black and white snapshot. A man standing outside a diner, holding a small boy. Charles stared at the image. "That's Dad. And the boy?" He squinted. It couldn't be. It looked like Tyrese. Charles went still. "No, that's not possible. I thought the same when I first saw him," Helen said. "But he has your father's stillness, the same way of listening." Charles stared at the photo again, then looked up at her. "That boy would be, what, 50 by now?" Helen shrugged. "Time doesn't always work the way we think it does." Charles felt his throat tighten. "Are you saying he's family?" "I don't know what he is," she said, "but I know what he's done. And maybe that's enough." Charles got up, heart pounding, and went back into the house. He searched every room, every hallway, the porch, the kitchen, but Tyrese was gone. No footprints, no bag, no note. Like he'd never been there at all. He called Franklin, his investigator. "Forget the background check," Charles said. Franklin sighed. "Too late. I already tried. There's no birth record, no social, nothing. Closest match I found was a child in Jacksonville who disappeared 6 years ago, but that boy would be 17 now." Charles hung up, palms damp. He walked back outside. Helen was still under the camellia tree, eyes closed, peaceful, and the garden smelled faintly of peach cobbler. But Charles knew in that moment, Tyrese didn't just walk into their lives. He had always been part of the story, waiting for them to catch up. A week later, the Radnor estate looked different, not because of renovations, but because of life. Windows stayed open. Light moved through the halls. Music played in the afternoons, old jazz records Helen used to love, the ones Charles never bothered to learn the names of. And Helen was walking. Not fully, not gracefully. But every morning, with Dolores or the nurse holding her arm, she took 3, then 4, then 6 steps. One slow shuffle after another, like her body had finally remembered it still belonged to her. Charles had stopped questioning it. There were things he still didn't understand, probably never would. But for once, that didn't bother him. He'd also made some changes. The downtown office? Still running. But he didn't show up 5 days a week anymore. He set up a fund, quietly, no press releases, called the Tyrese Initiative. It provided physical therapy and mental health resources for kids who couldn't afford them. The first pilot program launched out of an old community center on Habersham Street, and every time he walked through that center, he found himself looking, not for donors or results, for Tyrese. But he never showed up, not in person, not in photos, not even in memory exactly. It was like trying to hold on to a dream right after waking, details slipping through your fingers no matter how hard you tried to hold them. One afternoon, as Charles returned home, he noticed a folded sheet of paper stuck in the gate. He opened it. It was a sketch, black pencil, a street corner in Savannah, and on the edge of the drawing, small but clear, a figure, barefoot, hands in his pockets, eyes steady. No name, no message, just that. Charles stared at it for a long time before tucking it inside his jacket. Later that night, he sat with his mother on the patio. She had taken 7 steps that day. Her eyes were bright, her voice steadier than it had been in a decade. "I used to be afraid to die," she said softly. "Now I'm not. Not because I want to go, but because I finally feel like I've lived again." Charles glanced over at her. "You think he'll come back?" She smiled without looking at him. "I think he was never meant to stay." He nodded. He didn't say it out loud, but he hoped she was wrong. As the sky turned golden, they sat in silence. Eventually, Helen spoke again. "You're softer now." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Softer?" She chuckled. "That's a compliment. You were too sharp before. Everything in your life had an edge. Hard to run a company with soft hands. Harder to love anything that way," she said gently. He didn't respond. Instead, he took the sketch from his pocket and handed it to her. She studied it. Her eyes narrowed at the figure in the corner. "That's him?" she said quietly. "The way he stood, like the ground never moved under him." They sat there for a while longer, watching the light fade. A breeze passed through the trees. Somewhere far off, wind chimes rattled against each other. And for the first time in a long time, Charles felt something he hadn't let himself feel since he was a boy. Peace. Not the kind that comes from answers, the kind that comes from acceptance. Because sometimes, the world sends you what you need, not what you expect. And sometimes, healing doesn't start in hospitals or labs. Sometimes it starts in a grocery store parking lot, from the mouth of a barefoot boy who knows too much. And when it does, the only thing you can do is listen. If this story moved you, take a second to reflect on the people you've forgotten, the memories you've buried, or the forgiveness you never gave yourself. And if you're willing, share this story, subscribe to the channel, and help someone else remember what healing really looks like.